What's good, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I'm none of your business, otherwise known as BizCoon, and apologies for the fact that the dryer and the air conditioner are on at the same time, but we got another Metatron reaction coming at you right now, this time about a university study that proves him right on the ancient Egyptians. Specifically, here he's talking about the tomb of Seti I. For those that don't know, Metatron has made several videos discussing the race that the Egyptians belong to, where his primary belief, and which is the belief of what I can only assume is most people, is that the ancient Egyptians themselves were very mixed in terms of their ethnic and racial compositions, where you'll have more lighter-skinned people that are more related to people from the Levant and the rest of the Middle East living more in the north of Egypt, otherwise known as Lower Egypt due to the way the Nile flows, and the further south you go, the much darker their skin gets and are more closely aligned with the Nubians and the Kushites and so-called sub-Saharan Black African populations, where they have a predominantly light-skinned north, a predominantly dark-skinned south, but they are overall very mixed in terms of their racial and ethnic compositions. But where he gets attacked with regards to having this position, he ends up getting attacked by so-called afrocentrists that believe ancient Egypt was a 100% black civilization, that everyone in ancient Egypt was black, including all of the pharaohs, even though we have iconography that suggests that this is not true. There's a very famous, well-known piece of iconography that shows people of different skin tones and skin colors, where you'll have these very light-skinned people from Libya and the Middle East, and black Africans from Kush, and the ancient Egyptians themselves had that reddish-brown color to them. Now, that mostly describes the men of Egypt. The men of Egypt tend to be darker than their women, which have the more olive complexion, because the men were often the ones that would work out in the hot sun all day doing whatever it is that they would do, be it farming or other things, and the women would obviously stay at home most of the time and provide care for the family and stuff. But Afrocentrists believe that they were all black, and that, like, the modern population of Egypt are just the descendants of Arabs that wiped out the native Egyptian, black Egyptian population, even though this is a logistical impossibility just based on the fact that the Arabs themselves, when they first started expanding out of Arabia, didn't even make up that large of a population, even with their armies and stuff. There were millions of people that lived in Egypt at the time of the Arab conquests, both along the Nile and in their major cities like Alexandria. Alexandria had a lot of people from all over the Mediterranean, not just native Egyptians, but Greeks and Romans and the likes. So to say that the Arabs wiped out the native black Egyptians, which would have been a lot, to say that that happened, that's just, never mind improbable, it's almost impossible for such an event to have occurred. And if such an event were to have occurred, I'm pretty sure it would have been well documented by other people. But unless someone is able to prove that, then it is very, very unlikely that all of ancient Egypt, throughout all of its history, was 100% black. And of course, if you disagree with that take, then that somehow makes you a racist. In fact, there are a lot of Afrocentrist YouTubers that have attacked Metatron on multiple occasions. The one that I can remember off the top of my head is Mr. Imhotep. But he's not the only one. And Metatron has made an over an hour-long response to all of these afrocentrist claims about not only Metatron himself, saying that they are lying about him. Like, they'll say that Metatron is lying to you, and then Metatron responded by saying, well, they're lying about him. It was a whole big deal. No, I was very hyped when that happened, honestly. I've been watching his videos for some time now, and honestly, that was pretty hype. But today, we're going to see just what this study shows. I remember seeing the thumbnail, and I know exactly where it was going. So before we get started, make sure you watch his original video first and check out his channel and all that. And then leave a like and subscribe to help this channel grow. And alright, let's go ahead and see just what this study entails.
So we were talking a little bit about the tomb of Seti I, KV-17, so not the temple that we have discussed with the hieroglyphs, but the tomb. And what I wanted to show you is that this is part of the basis of my answer to, for instance, the Afrocentrist community, among others, when they were talking about the real and true color of the Egyptians. Now, given this is a lot more interesting and deep than the skin tone of a population. In fact, if anything, that's one of the least interesting aspects of an ancient civilization. It's just that it's unfortunately a battlefield for war, within a culture war, and therefore that's why it's often brought up. But
Yep, that's something that I don't really know what to add on to this. I want to add on to this, but I'm not sure what. But you'll have, I mean, we all know just how, like, amazing, like, ancient Egypt was for its time. And obviously it wasn't just Egypt, also other places like in the Middle East and India, China, and the rest of Europe and all that. But when people ignore stuff that actually matters and focus something as superficial as skin color and trying to relate it to the culture war, as we call it, the so-called woke versus non-woke whatever. And woke is a term that Metatron doesn't like to use, and it's also a term I don't like to use, so I'm gonna try not to use it, but I'm just trying to add on.
But today I don't necessarily want to focus on that too much. I'll present a couple of things, a couple of points, but I do want to discuss the broader point, which can be used when talking about preservation of pigments in both the Bronze Age, Iron Age, all the way up to classical antiquity, and how color and pigments react to exposure to the weather, but also, unfortunately, manumission and intervention of external sources, including us, human beings.
Yeah, look how, like, faded all the colors is. Obviously here, this is most likely what it's supposed to look like. All the vibrant shades that you can see, these striking blues and yellows, greens, and he's very likely going to bring up their skin color. I almost said skin color, but and then you look over here and all of the colors have faded, presumably because of, like, I guess it's because, like, France has a completely different climate from Egypt, and it's unfortunate what happens. Like, everyone likes to talk about how, like, during, like, the scramble for Africa, among other time periods, about, like, European powers going into these ancient sites and acquiring all sorts of ancient artifacts and having them up on display within their own museums, and then you'll have, like, people wanting to say, we need to give all this stuff back. Granted, a lot of that stuff still hasn't been given back, but yeah, it's unfortunate what happens here, or at least back in that time when it was acceptable. Nowadays, we have regulations in place that forbid these types of things, but what's done is done, and there's not much we can do about it. But you compare one piece of art to what it is now and compare it to what it was supposed to be, it's basically night and day.
Look at this. On the right, we see the original picture, photograph, of the current conditions of this drawing that we see here. You will notice that, they have got black hair. Both the queen and the pharaoh have got black hair. Their skin is very dark. They've got some gold. We see some green, some blue. We can see all of this. The one on the left is how the original colors would have looked. Blue hair and blue horns on the crown. So basically what's happening here...
Oh, so she was originally a blue-haired... I was going to say a blue-haired anime girl, but if when you think about blue-haired white bitches on TikTok and social media. I was also going to make a comparison to that, but I don't think it's fair to do that in this case.
Here, which is one of the main items of debate and clash with the Afrocentric community when I made several videos on ancient Egypt, is that one of the main points of debate is that they say, they do it for the skin, I'm not interested in the skin right now, but in general, the main point of debate and argument is that these are ancient, and so the colors fade, and so whatever color we see, the original would have been darker. The reality that has been proven, without any shade of a doubt, by this study, I will give you a link, is that in this specific case, with the tomb of Seti I, and there are several other occasions in which this happens, not just in ancient Egypt, but also in classical antiquity in the Mediterranean basin, is that oftentimes the opposite happens. Pigment darkens with time. Darkens with time.
Oh, well, how the tides have turned on Afrocentrism.
So it depends. There is no, if you hear an umbrella statement, pigment fades away, so the colors were always darker, that's wrong. In this case specifically, blue became black.
Oh, I just realized that. I see. Okay. I see what he was referring to earlier with regards to her blue hair. Damn. Checkmate, Afrocentrists, am I right?
Now, if you really want to talk about the ethnicity, whatever, yeah, the queen had dark skin. Totally. I would consider this a brown skin. So, yeah, sure, great, fantastic. As you know, there is a veritable cornucopia of different skin tones because, in my worldview, my position, ancient Egypt was a multi-ethnic civilization. They had people with different skin tones, as we see the way they represented themselves.
Yep, this is something I mentioned at the beginning of the video. He is of the idea that ancient Egypt was ethnically diverse, both in terms of actual ethnicities, people from the Levant, people from all over the Mediterranean, people from the south of and all that. And their skin colors would have ranged from the typical Mediterranean olive skin to black African. So there were black people in Egypt, and there still are black people in Egypt. Nobody is denying that at least some Egyptians were black. But that doesn't mean that all Egyptians are black. There were black Egyptians, there were brown Egyptians, white Egyptians, even to this day. There are many different shades of Egyptian that exist and continue to exist.
In art and how they represented other people. By the way, in this specific tomb, there is the very famous, some say infamous, representation of not only themselves, but also the Nubians, who are clearly black, and different from the regular Egyptian, whose skin is instead a mixture of brown and red, if we want to look at the pigments used. But do remember, oftentimes the pigments, the way they look now, are darker because of the aging. And then we see Asiatics, sometimes we see Roman, and Romans look European. The Romans look just European. Some have kind of very fair skin. Brown hair has been shown as a representation of Romans. Black hair has been shown as a representation of Romans. So if you cut my hair, I could have been a good representative of a Roman when it comes to both, in some cases, when it comes to both skin and complexion. But sometimes they have a lighter brown as well that's shown in Egyptian representations of Romans. And then you have the Asiatics tend to be very light skinned, and so are the Libyans. And you can recognize the Libyans because they have an ostrich feather on their head. Ostrich being a connection that the ancient Egyptians recognized with the Libyans specifically. Yeah. And then there is the whole section where I remember that they discussed it, and as I say, I did read the letters where they say that look at this, exactly this. I want to read this last thing. Giambattista Belzoni discovered the tomb in 1817, but in reality it was discovered by Zahi Hawass because he discovered everything.
Oh, yep. That's the thing. Metatron reacted to the meeting between Zahi Hawass and Joe Rogan, where Zahi Hawass was constantly putting down Joe for asking questions regarding the more alternative sphere, like asking about things like the concept of Zet Tepi. I think that's what it's called. I don't remember what it's actually called. And the alleged structures that some Italian researchers found under the pyramids, and also the hole on top of the Sphinx's head, and also brought up Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and Zahi was all like, no, they're not real. None of it happened. If I never heard of it, it never happened. All right? The hole on top of the Sphinx's head, it is not a door. There is no door. And there is no Zetepi. There is no holes of Amenti under the pyramids. I had never heard of it. They never happened. They are not real. It never happened. It never existed. It is not a door. And it was hilarious. You guys should check it out. It's absolutely absurd. It's funny in a very absurd way.
And he immediately realized its importance, describing it as the principal, open quotes, the principal, the most perfect and splendid monument in that country, close quotes. He did make drawings and wax casts, that already, of many decorations and staged an exhibition in England in 1821. The conservation conditions were good, and many of the early visitors said that the colors were as fresh as if the painters had just finished their work. This is mind-blowing. The plates attached to his publication document some of the removed reliefs still in place. The opening through began a long degenerative process since the following year when a flood caused the fall of fragments from walls and ceilings. So similar situations happened in the temple of Seti I as well. And when you read one more thing that I want to add to this, and there was a practice that happened when there was a craze with tourists. And what they would do is that they would create wet paper casts of the hieroglyphs and also a lot of the art. So what that does...
Is he about to talk about, like, potential forgeries that were made in order to, like, capitalize on them? Because I remember him reacting to a video by archaeologist Flint Dibble about people making counterfeit goods and stuff in the guise of ancient artifacts. Which, yeah, that's... I mean, I know that they're just trying to get that money and all that, but shit, you really have to stoop as low as to forge ancient artifacts?
That they would take like a paper, damp it, and put it on top of the wall, and that would take some of the pigments and kind of create a little bit of a carbon copy of it, and then they could sell it.
Oh, so similar, not quite what I was thinking, but I'm guessing something like that would ruin the pigments, which, yeah, I wouldn't want that kind of stuff happening to any culture, really, regardless of where it is. Like, even in places like the Mesopotamia, I'm pretty sure people who live in places that have these ancient cultures, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't appreciate their ruins and stuff being desecrated like that, and I'm sure Egypt is no exception.
This was done a lot, which was a disgrace, and that ruined a lot of these. So the preservation is different to the way it was. And some of the reasons, again, when we look at these, we may think it's because it's 1,000 years old. The reality is because of all the nonsense that happened in the last 200 years.
Nonsense. It's nonsense, you muppet!
And that also connects to one of the points that I was presenting during my counter-argument, where I was discussing with some of my intellectual opponents on what the ancient Egyptians looked like. Because one thing that happened is that there is an image I'm going to show you right now, and then we'll close with this topic, we'll start the next topic. But I want to show you this image. Okay. And it takes us to this. From, as I said...
Yes, this. I brought this up, like, at the beginning of the video, where this is a Libyan, this is a Nubian, this is a Levantine Semitic, and this was an Egyptian. And it shows that even people in the modern day, you'll have these, I'm just gonna call them apologists, who will say, oh, the ancients didn't have a concept of race, and they didn't have a concept of skin color. And I'm like, well, if they didn't have a concept of skin color or classifying people based on that, then how do you explain something like this? Watch them say it's a forgery.
Say the tomb of Seti I. I'm going to give you a little presentation of this because it's fascinating.
Welcome to the inner circle.
Oh yeah, let's go. We have Reptilatron right here, or I guess Graytron. I don't know. He's been live streaming 5 nights a week as of recently, and he has these little voice gimmicks. Maybe I should do that for myself.
Welcome to the inner circle. Right, we're gonna vote, guys. Which one is the best voice? The angel voice or the demon voice? We'll have to decide.
I don't know. Wait, that echoing one was supposed to be an angel? Okay. I mean, the name of Metatron refers to the highest angel in Judaism, so it wouldn't surprise me.
I think they're both pretty cool. When we were talking about this, so this image is found in the tomb of Seti I, as I was describing, and it's an image that represents the way the ancient Egyptians saw themselves. So the guy on the right is an ancient Egyptian, this is an Asiatic, this is a Nubian, and this is a Libyan, okay? And I want to specify that this is a drawing that represents an image on the wall. This is not from ancient Egypt. I think it's kind of obvious if you look at it, but just to make sure that we understand each other, this is just a drawing made by an Egyptian.
Oh, so some ancient Egyptian guide, an ancient Egyptian artist just drew it on, not necessarily a wall, but I guess just in general for reference, I'm guessing. Let's see what he says.
Egyptology. What's interesting about this is that we're going to look at the original on the wall. I have it right here. Okay, so this is not the original, but this is the full image, famous full image, and it was made. Minutoli is the name of the Egyptologist. Minutoli's reproduction. One thing about Minutoli already.
Oh, it wasn't even made by an ancient Egyptian. It was made by someone later in history. Okay, I see.
That I want to discuss is the fact that Minutoli is an eyewitness. So he went. This is the original wall.
Oh, so it's a recreation of a pre-existing mural that, based on what we can assume, may have been based on original pigments that were there.
Wall. I'm going to show you. There we go. So this is where we take all of this. This is where we take all of this. I've done an analysis of it, and I'm going to share it with you right now. One thing that I want to say about Minutoli that connects to what we were discussing today is that Minutoli went there before all the crazy degradation happened, is an eyewitness, and we've just discussed how vivid and well preserved the tomb was. We just read it.
Okay, now we're all wrapping it back together, circling right back. Metatron mentioned the fact that people a little later on, not too long ago, he mentioned people would get I don't remember exactly what he said, something moist, something. They would put it on the wall and then recreate it that way, and that led to the degradation of the art. And this guy that he just mentioned that made that drawing was there before all of that took place. Okay, now it all makes sense.
We read all the information about it. He had access to it before everything went to shit hit the fan. And then he drew, he had created the drawing, he commissioned someone to create the drawing, and he said, yes, that's a good representation, because he couldn't take the freaking wall and bring it home, luckily, since people have done that, and he wanted to show it back home in Europe. So, I believe Minutoli more than someone who looks at it now and draws conclusion, also because often these conclusions come from a place of culture and messaging.
Oh, and that reminds me, this is the video that I remember watching. This was the hour 21-minute video that I mentioned earlier. Nah, Metatron announced it in a community post, and oh my god, I was so hyped for this. You don't even know. And I watched I watched this all the way, and damn.
Rather than whatever the heck, an actual analysis, an in-depth analysis of the data. So, having given that, let's have a look at the current situation with this section of the wall, right? And then let's see what we can learn from it as we correlate with this drawing. So, of course, when we look at the drawing, we see that there is a massive difference between what the ancient Egyptian, the average ancient Egyptian looks like. I would say that, I would go as far as saying that this is probably a typical representation of an ancient Egyptian of the Delta area, so the lower Egypt, the one that is closer to the sea and the Mediterranean, rather than a typical ancient Egyptian in Upper Egypt, which was bordering with Nubia, because that area, in my opinion, would have had a higher percentage of people that, even though they were originally Nubians, their forefathers, then their children in that area, they would have looked like a Nubian, not necessarily this level of black. This is just an example, of course, it's a stereotype. But stereotypes sometimes, even though they may not be descriptive of minutiae, they can still give you a general idea. Just like the Romans telling us that Germanic people were blonde, exception the ones in Scotland, they tell us they're redheads. Okay.
Yeah. That's something that Metatron has mentioned before as a sort of rebuttal to the afrocentrist claims about Egyptians being black. Or at least, yeah. Like, the Greeks would use a word to describe Egyptians that they say means black. But Metatron has explained that that's not what that word meant. I don't remember what the word was. I believe it's the word that the term melanin comes from. And it doesn't necessarily mean black. It just means darkened. Meaning, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that the ancient Egyptians, whenever they depicted their women, they were usually lighter skinned than the men, because the men would have worked outside in the hot sun, and the hot sun would have tanned them, meaning that this is more likely a tanning from the sun, and that ancient Greek word means darkened, in the sense that their skin would have been lighter, but got darker over time. And as Metatron explained, the Greeks and Romans, they referred to Norse people as blonde, or sometimes yellow, and distinguish them from themselves. The Greeks and Romans considered themselves to be white, but they considered Germanic and Nordic people to be blonde, and mention Scottish people to be red.
Okay, I'm not saying that every single ancient Germanic tribes, they were all copy-paste, every single one with blonde hair, but if the Romans give us that stereotype, it probably means that there was a high percentage of Germanic people that had those phenotypic characteristics. And I think we can apply the same logic here. I think this is a typical inhabitant of the Delta. I'll get hatred for it, I don't care. And this is a typical inhabitant of Nubia, and maybe of some Egyptians, a certain percentage within the Egyptian population clusters in Upper Egypt, which bordered with Nubia, for obvious reasons, that could be also a representation of an Egyptian. And here, on the walls, we see a clear distinction. And we also see that the Libyans tend to be very fair-skinned. Now, according to the Afrocentric perspective, this is not a representation of the typical skin of a Libyan. Apologies for that, I don't know what happened there. I think it is. I personally, maybe not this milk white, but still, maybe kind of like me. Could be an idea.
Yeah, like, I think now when they say Libyan, it mostly refers to, I guess, Berber populations who do have, even in the modern day, a wide variation of skin tones. There are Berbers, particularly in and around Morocco and Algeria, that have blonde hair and blue eyes. And then there are Berbers much further south within the heart of the Sahara that do have black hair and brown eyes. And yeah, the Berbers with blonde hair and blue eyes, they are white-skinned, and Berbers' black hair and brown eyes are typically more brown, black skin. And the same thing also applies to, like, Arabs in general. There are light-skinned Arabs, some of which could have light hair and eyes, and then there are black Arabs as well, or at least they identify as Arab. Like, the people of Sudan and Somalia tend to be black-skinned, but they're also considered themselves to be Arab, at least to a certain extent.
Idea. I think so. I think it would be a good representation. Now, that's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I just scratched the surface. There's a lot.
I look over to the side of my screen and I just see Mudahar, and of course, Moist Critical.
To say about this. All right, so what I do show in this section here is this. So, first, we need to try and understand which part of the wall we are looking at. And I think you can immediately recognize the black gentleman here, the Nubian, is over here. Mm-hmm. And then we need to find this guy. We need to find this guy. Now, what in this situation, and again, I'm not trying to look, this is the Nubian. This is a bad representation of a Libyan, because if you look at the wall and you look what's right next to the Nubian, you can clearly see that this looks nothing like this, so Minutoli didn't know what he was doing with his drawing. This is a wrong interpretation, because even though Minutoli did find elements of people that were found on this wall, he didn't draw them in the same order as the wall. And you can see this, because if I play it, boom.
Oh, there we... Oh, I see it. I see the little feather right here. You can see it, like, clear, almost clear as day. So, yeah, sometimes you just have to look really hard when it comes to these types of things. It's like a game of Where's Waldo, Ancient Egyptian edition.
Got this guy. Not here. And once you do this, and you zoom in, as we will, and you identify it, you can immediately spot the ostrich feather, and I think it's actually a very good representation of what we see here. And here we see a bunch of Egyptians. Once again, do remember that, as we have proven with the study from the University of Florence, their colors would have been lighter. We can kind of even see it here a little bit. Do they look white? No, obviously. No one is saying that the Egyptians were white, but definitely they did not look like this either. So we zoom in, we recognize the blue a little bit here. It's a shame that it's gone.
Yep, there. Yep, the little shade of blue, and it's all faded.
So much of it, but we do recognize it, and yeah, I think there is no way that I think the skin, maybe they went a little too light here, but still, this is not a brown man, this is not a black man, this Libyan is represented, the tattoos are still intact, and that's another characteristic of this culture, by the way.
Oh,
and
right.
here, which is, because again, another thing that I brought up on this video when I presented it, was the fact that oftentimes it is also a matter of which picture are you using, are they using flash, what kind of illumination is there, so this is why it's wrong to just show one image of a wall and call it a day. You need to show multiple, and if you do show multiple, then you will see that, yeah, this is kind of a pink skin tone, and you can recognize it, and there is no way that you can tell me that this guy was a black.
Him saying pink skin tone remind me of a scene in Hotel Rwanda where some guy, it was either Hotel Rwanda or it was something else, but a guy was talking to a judge, and I think the judge was white, and the judge told him, "Why do you refer to yourself as black when you're more of a brown?" To which the guy said, "Why do you refer to yourself as white, but you're more of a pink?" And the audience, the Everyone in the courthouse was chuckling a little.
Black African. You can still see the pigment, it's there, and it's quite clear. Regardless of the ethnic part, which is, as I say, it's the least interesting and the least important when it comes to these things, it is fascinating. This looks a little bit black. It was blue. And in fact, you can still kind of see it a little bit. And you can see the Asiatic in the drawing is the one that was kind of lightened a bit too much, but in the original, we can still see the kind of complexion that it would have.
Yeah, you can tell that it's a little darker than what the drawing has.
Had, and we can still see the original red as part of his girth, or would you call it apron, that he was wearing here. So yeah, this is part of the tomb, and then there's a lot that goes into this also. But yeah, so it's a fascinating section. It's a fascinating representation.
Yeah, you guys should check out this. You guys need to check out that video. I might link it in the description. I know I'll link this one that we're watching now, but yeah.
But as a one last thing I want to say, yeah, this color is actually kind of similar, because do remember, this is what they look like now after the degradation and the darkening. So is it really so strange to believe that what Minutoli represented when he chose this specific tone wasn't what he actually saw? I can see this getting a little lighter and getting into this 100%. Give it 200 years, considering the studies that we have reviewed. I think I trust Minutoli. I do trust his eyewitness and expertise. The guy was an Egyptologist. But Grandma told me, yeah, but then of course Netflix will bring Grandma, and here we are.
Oh my god, yep. Don't forget about Grandma, right? Because she didn't care what they tell you guys in school. It doesn't matter what they tell you in school. All that matters is the following. Napoleon Bonaparte was a Bangladeshi. As you can clearly see, that's the end of this video. That was certainly something, a little snippet of what we have to offer here, not only in terms of Metatron's channel, but mine as well. We're gonna go balls deep into all of these different topics. Ignore this thumbnail selection. It is not relevant to the video, but either way, I hope you enjoyed this little reaction. Make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to help grow this channel. Make sure you go visit Metatron as well, and I'll see you guys in the next video.